Welcome to the Resiliency of the Human Spirit podcast, where we share all about human triumphs for the collective's healing and empowerment. I am your host, Priscilla Hanley. My guest today is Christina Keys. Christina was a family caregiver for her late mother. Due to her caregiver commitments, she had to leave her thriving career, which led her to become physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and financially bankrupt. Through her caregiver journey, Christina found many gaps in resources in the local system, which led her to create a national program. Her program helps connect business organizations and family caregivers so that they can collectively transform the care space community and amplify their voices for change. Without further ado, I'm going to bring Christina on right now. Hi,
Hi, Priscilla.
Christina.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're a very busy woman, so thank you for joining us here today. So I am really glad that we're going to have this conversation because I think the topic of family caregivers is not talked about enough. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad we're going to have this conversation today. So I did some research for today. And so I did a Google search on how many family caregivers there are in the United States. And this is what I got. I'm going to read a short paragraph here. According to an article by AARP dated 8 February 2024, there are more than 48 million family caregivers. So does that figure sound about right?
Yeah, there's actually more than 53 million. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I think we can safely say that a lot of these family caregivers, they don't really know about the resources and support that's available for them in their local community. So,
Correct.
like I said, that's why you're here, because
hmm
you created your own national program, which is phenomenal. I'll open the floor to you now and have you share your story and about your caregiver journey with your mom and how you started this program and what are the resources that you're providing for the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what happened with me was I had a great career in tech and doing really well, playing on 3 softball teams, had a long-term relationship with my boyfriend many years, traveling. And one day I was with, I talked to my mom in the morning. Everything was fine. She was only 62 years old. She told me about how she went to the movies with a friend the night before. And we were joking on the phone and she said, I'll call you later. And I was in the grocery store with my personal trainer because at the time I could afford a personal trainer. And I got a call at 3:52 p.m. saying your mother's had a stroke and we don't expect her to live. And I drove up to Seattle, which was about 3 hours away, and walked in, and my mother was hooked up to life support. They had given her 1% chance to live. She was in that hospital for almost 4 months. She was paralyzed from the neck down and couldn't talk. I lived with her in that hospital. And when I say I lived with her in that hospital, I lived out of a suitcase, slept in that chair that's by the hospital bed, would go home once a week to shower. And I was there with her while she was regaining back her mobility in her left side. I helped teach her how to talk. I knew my mom didn't come back for anything more than love. I remember when I was teaching her how to talk, the speech therapists who were wonderful, they were trying to teach her how to talk with these stick figure flashcards. And I knew she came back for love. And so I had printed out 300 pictures of our life, her garden, her grandchildren, us kids, her house, all of these things, her pets. And we use those as flashcards. And that's how she learned how to talk. And frankly, when I was in that hospital with her, I didn't know I was a family caregiver. I didn't even realize I was a daughter who was taking care of her mom. I was literally just a daughter who was afraid her mom was going to die because the doctors said, we don't think she's going to live through this because her stroke was so severe. Well, while I was in that hospital, I kept asking the doctors, the nurses, and anybody else, what do I do? How do I do this? And they really weren't much help. They let me wheel her out of there with nothing more than a list of in-home care agencies and senior living places. And they didn't even tell me that in-home care wasn't covered by insurance. And so I get her home, and all of a sudden I'm thrown into the role of being a physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, med tech, a case manager, a medical assistant, like all of these things. And literally, I was selling software and hardware on a daily basis. I had no medical training, but all of a sudden I had to figure out how to take care of her, and she was having seizures and all of these other medical complications. And then I had to hire caregivers so I could still work. So I had to learn how to manage that. And I remember when one time my Facebook memories came up, and it was a post when mom first was getting ready to come home, and I'd put on there, this is how much I didn't know when I first started. Because literally, like, our life changed from 10 o'clock in the morning to 3:52 in the morning. Our life completely changed, right? Uh, this is how much I didn't know. I had put a post on Facebook that said, does anybody know if there's such thing as like babysitters except for adults? I literally wasn't even familiar with the term caregiver. And here I was, literally a caregiver, and I didn't even know what that was. And so on this journey of 10 years, the first 3 years, I was trying to figure it out. I was struggling. I was constantly asking the doctors and hospitals, nurses, medical places, do you know of any local resources? And nobody knew of any. I got a few. And well, what happened was I'm going through all of this, and I'm trying to work full time. I'm trying to have a relationship. I'm trying to, hold on to my life. I had to let go a lot of that. Like, I wasn't sleeping. I was afraid every day that my mother was going to die if I didn't get it right. And so what happened was 3 years in, it was February 2017 when I left my job, my career. I had to leave my career because I had used up all my vacation time, all my 2 weeks, all my sick time by February, just taking mom to doctor's appointments and whatnot. And I went to my last doctor's appointment, and they said, Christina, your body is literally shutting down. You've got high blood pressure now. You've gained almost 100 pounds. You've got diabetes. I'm sleeping only like 5 to 10 hours a week at this point. And they said, you would be lucky to live 6 months. So now I've got this thing in front of me because my life had been completely depleted. I was completely bankrupt emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, and spiritually. And, my mother had a great career. She was an aerospace engineer with one of the top military clearances, security clearances you can have. I had a career in tech. I was making almost $100,000 at the time. And still, even with that, her pension, my money from my job, her savings, her 401k, my 401k, what we had to pay on top of insurance for her care, for the things insurance didn't pay for. We had gone through all of our life savings and well over, I would say, $300,000 in less than a couple years. So by the time I left my job, we were having to have garage sales. I was having to go to food banks. When I left my job, I wound up having to, give blood, sell my stuff, do everything I could because I was paying for my mother's care, $1,500 to $3,000 a month, and trying to work, and all of those things were hard. And what happened was when I changed careers and all of these things, the reason why I almost died is because I was trying to figure it out on my own. And I didn't know how to do it. And I always explain caregiving, being thrown into caregiving, as somebody saying, you need to build a plane while you're flying a plane, but you don't have an instruction manual, you don't have a toolbox, and you're afraid of heights. That is the exact definition of what it's like to be thrown into caregiving, right? And even if you've heard about it or read book, you're just not prepared of watching somebody you love slowly decline. You're not prepared emotionally or mentally or physically. And it really, really tests your spirituality as well, and definitely not financially. So no matter how much you think you're prepared. So what happened when I changed careers was I wound up getting a job as a sales and marketing manager, part-time job for a company in the retirement industry. And my whole job was to find resources for seniors and family caregivers. And in the town that I was dying in, that I had been told I have 6 months left to live in, I found like hundreds of resources, just hundreds of resources. And I was so excited about it. I was wearing my work hat, but I was also wearing my caregiver hat. And so I started calling in these experts to do these community classes and then for caregivers. And I didn't know how many caregivers there were in my town. Now, in anybody's town, there is usually 10 to 17% of your population are family caregivers. I live in a town of, there's 500,000 plus people in Clark County. There are 49,500 family caregivers here. So in any town you're in, you're not alone. There's a lot there. And so I then asked, is there a senior resource fair? Oh, there used to be. I said, well, there is now, but it's a senior and caregiver fair, right? And then I got all those people together and I thought, well, maybe we should form a nonprofit. So we formed a hyper local nonprofit. And that nonprofit got some national recognition, won some awards, not because I'm so great or the nonprofit was so great. The concept was very different, though. The hyper local concept was very different. And the fact that we weren't charging advertisers a bunch of money made it so we can share the information about the nonprofit, share the information about some of the independent people who are doing some great work for caregivers and people, share the support groups and things like that. So I did that. And then that got some national recognition. A national company picked me up and asked me to duplicate the program all across the United States. And I, trained well over 100 family caregivers, current and former family caregivers, to help me build communities all over the United States. And while I'm doing this, I'm also advocating for positive changes for family caregivers. I'm also speaking all over and nationally, and just one thing led to another. And, the biggest thing is one of the things I always learned is if you go through something that you struggle through and you make it through it, you have a responsibility to be of service to the folks who come after you to share what you've learned so it's not as hard for them. And it's definitely that relationship with my mom, it changed. Mom was super independent and then she lost her independence and our roles changed. And it's also a way for me to say to my mother when she was here, like, you're not a burden. You made me a stronger woman than I ever was or I ever thought I could be. And so my work gets to be, even though my mother passed December 28th of 22, my mom was very involved in a lot of the press and the media I did. If you see, like, there's a documentary called The Love of Care I was in and other videos, and she's in there and she wanted to be in there, she wanted to help people as well. And so any of the work that I get to do is definitely a love letter to my mother saying you weren't a burden. And it's also a way for us to help other family members, other families across the United States who are walking through this. So
Wow, such a empowering, profound story. So you said it costs you like $3,000 a month, right?
yeah,
To
yeah, yeah. And that's because I was paying private pay. I wasn't going through an agency. And I also was doing 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours at night. And I was supplementing a bunch of the care. I was doing quite a bit of the care. Agencies cost anywhere from, depending on the state you're in and the level of care you're getting, you're going to have to pay between $29 and $52 an hour. So you can see where that can add up quick. Private pay is going to be anywhere from, 17 to $35 an hour. Sometimes it can go up to 40, 45, depending on the level of care your loved one needs. So, and there's no insurance that pays for that. If you're on Medicaid, state insurance, and you've also registered for long-term care benefits, because you don't just automatically get it on Medicaid. You have to also register for long-term care benefits, and they do an assessment based on your activities of daily living that you can do. They will give you a certain amount of care that you can get, certain amount of hours of care. But the thing is a lot of the agencies only will take a small percentage, like 7 to 12% of their caseload is Medicaid. So you're on waiting lists a lot of times waiting for those caregivers. So, and if you're on Medicare, and my mom had Medicare and a supplement, did not pay for it. So it did not pay for it. You're paying out of pocket for that care. And not many people have long-term care insurance. And if they do, if they have any pre-existing conditions, half the time it disqualifies them for that. Now, there are other programs like if you're a veteran, like aid and attendance that you can tap into that might help you with some of those costs. If you go to your local VA office, they can help you with that. But there are definitely guidelines and requirements for that as well. So most of the time people are paying out of pocket, and it takes people from middle class to poverty level really quick.
So, yeah, this is so worrying to me because what happens to those people who are already at poverty level? How does this system work for them if they
Well,
don't have
they
the
a lot of
money?
them will be on Medicaid, right? A lot of them will be on Medicaid, and they'll get the help they need. But that depends again on if they have long-term care, benefits as well. That has to be registered, and that's not an easy process. I also cared for my ex-boyfriend as well because we broke up in 2019, and 5 months later he had a stroke and I became his caregiver, and I had to file for Medicaid for him and long-term care benefits for him. And it is not an easy process. And even with my knowledge in the industry, it was not an easy process. He had multiple strokes. And by 2022, I think it was May of 2000, May 9th of 2022, he had his last stroke where it made it so he needed to go in long-term care, 24-hour care. And at that point, I had to, have him changed over to a state guardian because the Medicaid process is so complicated that if you make any mistakes, you could lose all your benefits. And that's the last thing you want to do with somebody you're caring for, have them lose the benefits, because trying to get reset up in any of that is not good. So I had to make a choice that was really for the best interest for him. So yeah, it's tough. And I've heard, like, there was a lady that I met and she was 70 years old. Her and her husband had lived in this house for like 50 years. And he had some major medical thing happen, had to be life flighted, had to be put into 24-hour care home. And they wound up losing their house. And at 70 years old, she was living in her car. And at 70 years old, everything they worked for was gone, and this was, he wasn't even in the long-term care facility that long, just between like the hospital bills and the life flight and being in the long-term care facility, an adult family home or a senior living community, depending again on which state you live in and what your level of care is and what type of home it is, you're going to be looking at anywhere from like $4,000 to $17,000 a month, a month. And so who has that kind of money? Most people in America can barely afford their rent or their mortgage right now, let alone that kind of money, right?
Right. It's clear that this system is totally broken. It's not
Right.
serving anybody. So I just want to ask you now, if someone suddenly found themselves in the family caregiver role, what would you suggest the first thing they do?
The first thing I suggest you do is find a support group, find some type of support. There's multiple ways to find support. There's peer-to-peer support groups that are online and they're free. You can find, like, Daughterhood actually is one. Daughterhood.org is one. You can find some. You can go to Caregiver Action Network and they will help you find some. They've also got a great hotline if you're dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's. Of course, the Alzheimer's Association, they can help you find one. You can also, even just on social media, if you're not ready to, do a Zoom meeting, then you can go on social media and just search caregiver support groups. There's many caregiver support groups there. You also, I would say, look into getting a care coach. There's tons of care coaches out there. And what a care coach is somebody like myself who's actually been through this journey, has actually made the mistakes and learned so many things along the way, and is now in the industry and very resourceful, not only in how to guide you through finding the right resources, but also navigating those emotions and the life changes that you're going to be going through, how your life is going to completely change. So, and if you don't know where to find a care coach, you can certainly reach out to me and I can direct you to somebody who, there are wonderful people. Like, you could reach out to Bill Cohen, Happy Healthy Caregiver. There are many, many that I can certainly refer you to, or a good therapist. Just make sure your therapist understands caregiving. Because for instance, I had a therapist and she kept saying to me, you should just put your mom in a home. You should just put your mom in a home. Listen, that is not good advice. One, it wouldn't have been good for my mom's mental health. My mom could live somewhat independently with my help. And frankly, it was cheaper, even though I was paying $1,500, $3,000 a month, and we were paying the mortgage and the house. It was literally with her level of care she would have needed in a home. It was cheaper to keep her at home. And frankly, aging in place, anytime we can have somebody age in place, it's better. So she
Right.
didn't understand. So that wasn't a right choice. So I would say definitely find some support, whether it be a social media group where you can find out that what you're going through is normal. You can run things by people, a hotline, again, Caregiver Action Network, many other options. And of course, you'll be giving out my information at the end of this. There's quite a few options on my website as well. And you can always text my community text line, which you're going to give at the end too, to help find stuff.
So I'm just wondering, why is there a disconnect? Like, why are these resources that's already available? Why is it not reaching the community? Like, many people don't even know what's out there for
Yeah.
support.
Well, first of all, you got to understand, like for me, when I got thrown into caregiving, I didn't even know what type of resources to ask for. Again, I didn't even know there was such thing as caregivers. I had that list of home care, but nobody really explained to me what home care was. And it's very interesting because with my nonprofit, I worked the hotline and caregivers would call all the time and say, oh, I need a caregiver for my mom. And I'd say, well, tell me your caregiver story. And I'd listen to their caregiver story and I knew what resources I was going to tell them, but I wanted to hear the other resources because I spoke Caregiver 101 really well, right? And I heard where, they could use some medical equipment, where they could use some food service, where they could use all kinds of different resources, right? A lot of times they don't even know what to ask for. I didn't know what to ask for. Again, a lot of times these people don't even know that they're caregivers yet. They're just daughters or sons or husbands or wives who just don't want anything worse to happen to their loved one, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is the way our system is set up is obviously, how are you going to find out about them if there's no advertising, right? And a lot of nonprofits don't have money to advertise. And frankly, some of the most valuable resources I had were some of the smaller nonprofits. Like, for instance, there's a wonderful nonprofit here called Caring Closet, and they give away free durable medical equipment. Now, a lot of people don't know this. Medicare, you only get one piece of medical equipment every 5 years. My mom needed a hospital bed, a wheelchair, a walker, like all of these things. Where am I going to get all of that? Right. And so a lot of people don't know that. It's crazy because people don't know how to find this stuff in their own community because unless they're a large company that has a large advertising budget, it's going to be hard for them to find them. So I can tell you the way to find them is, first of all, if you are getting any home care, right? If you are getting any home care through an agency, ask that agency if they know of any local resources. Because again, if you're just getting into being a caregiver, you really don't know what to ask for. So ask that agency. And if they give you a resource for a medical place, when you're on the phone with that medical place, ask that medical place, do you know of any other types of resources? And whoever you call, ask that question. Every place you call, you should get at least 2 or 3 different types of resources. And you might not need them now, but you might need them later. For instance, my mom didn't need food at the beginning, right? But after a while, we literally had to make choices of like, can we afford food or can we afford care, right? And so we had to tap into Meals on Wheels, which is a national program, right? So ask those questions. And if you find a support group, you can ask in that support group too. If you don't know what questions to ask, you can say, these are the challenges I'm facing. We don't have money for food. We don't have money for adult briefs. My mom's wheelchair just broke. I need to find another one and insurance won't cover it. Ask those questions to the support group, the care groups, whoever you're talking to whatever companies you are dealing with now. And hopefully they will be able to refer you. So, and if not, you can go to great places like, again, Caregiver Action Network. different places like that who are going to help you out. Alzheimer's Association is going to help you out. There are some resources on my website. Happy Healthy Caregiver has some resources. There's a lot of really great, resources. Also, a lot of great resources are listening to podcasts like this, right? You're hearing a lot of great information, right? And so there's like Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver. There's so many different great podcasts out there. There's All Home Care Matters, and they have a lot of resources on their website as well.
Thank you for that information. And I'll put all that information in the show notes, Christina. Thank you. So now I'd like to move on and talk about you specifically, you in your caregiver journey. How did you navigate your life and your new normal with you being a caregiver?
Well, I think I know the reason why I got that diagnosis of, you only have 6 months to live is because those first few years, I was really thinking normal should have been what my life was before caregiving. I didn't take a minute to allow myself to redefine normal. So I was in competition with this old life. So I was constantly failing, right? So the first thing I had to do was redefine normal, right? I had to redefine normal. I also had to give myself some grace. I had never done this before, right? I had never done this before. I was learning and it was tough. And yeah, that's the biggest thing I had to do is, how do I do this today? And if I didn't know, ask the questions and also say it's okay to not know. I didn't have to get it right all the time because frankly, when you're caregiving, there are new things that are coming up every single day. Just when you think you have this perfect routine down for your loved one, like my mother, I knew she had seizures. I knew she was paralyzed. I knew that sometimes her speech was impaired. I was not prepared for when we were driving down the road at 60 miles an hour and she started choking. And I had to figure out how to give her the Heimlich, how to give a paralyzed person who's in a seatbelt the Heimlich maneuver as you're pulling over to the side of the road and calling 911. I wasn't prepared for the time she went unresponsive. Again, while I'm on the road, and I had to revive her, call 911 and pull over in traffic. These things come up for us all the time as caregivers, new medical conditions, new baselines, new things that are out of the norm from the baselines. And so we need to give ourselves some grace in all of that.
Yeah, good point. So I want to ask you, how difficult or how easy was it for you to set and maintain your boundaries for yourself, for self-care?
Yeah, setting boundaries, it's so interesting because so many people, and I know they mean well, because my mother, one of the things that I don't often talk about, but it is a fact. My mother was my abuser growing up, right? And then I became her caregiver. And so I had to go through a lot of therapy and stuff before I even became her caregiver, right? And I used to set boundaries with her. They would work really well. Well, that was when she was healthy, right? I could say, Mom, if you do this, I'm going to do this, right? And that worked really well. Well, now I'm dealing with a mother who's got memory issues, there's a lot of things going on. If I set a boundary, she might not remember it 10 minutes later. And so I had to learn how to set boundaries with myself, right? It's really hard to set boundaries with somebody who has medical issues a lot of times because, especially if they have memory issues, right? Or you might set a boundary with even somebody who has seizures, right? Well, you're setting this boundary and they're having this seizure all this. I mean, you know what I mean? You have to set boundaries with yourself. I mean, you can be clear with the person as much as you can, but really the most important person you're going to set boundaries with is yourself. And I had to do that the same way I did anything. The same way I came back from getting that diagnosis of you have 6 months to live, which is baby steps, right? I had to do like that self-care, right? Because everybody talked about self-care. And frankly, self-care before was like, my normal for self-care before was going to spas, mani-pedis, traveling, reading a book by the beach. I had time and money to do all that, right? As a caregiver, I didn't, right? And so I had to redefine self-care, and I didn't want to listen before because I didn't have time and I didn't think it was possible because I was so worried about my mother. So when I got that diagnosis, My first act of self-care was taking a blood pressure pill and texting a friend that I had taken it. My next act of self-care was every time I walked down the hall, I would reach up to the ceiling. I would go to the mailbox and I would stand there and I would take, a couple deep breaths and I would let those things build up. It's just like any of that. It's all baby steps. It's all baby steps so we can get to where we need to be, so we can survive this, because it's not just about the added stress that's on our body. It's not just about being physically tired. I mean, again, caregiving affects us not only physically, but financially, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. It definitely tested my faith as well at a time when I needed to have faith. And frankly, it doesn't matter if you believe in God, Buddha, or Larry from the convenience store, you know, or the tree outside your house. You're going to need that tree, even if it's a tree, right? You're going to need that going through this, because you're going to need strength, because you're going to feel like you're failing a lot of the time and you're not going to know how to do things a lot of the time. So it's important to have that in your life, whatever it may be, whatever it may be.
Right. So I want to ask you, what did this whole experience teach you about yourself or about life?
Well, I'll tell you one of the biggest things it taught me. One, it taught me a whole new level of love, a whole new level of love. I had no idea. I thought I knew how to love before, you know, and it also taught me, I think about who saved my life and who helped me get through this, and it was that woman who in 2017 was told she had 6 months to live, who was 100 pounds overweight, had diabetes, had high blood pressure, was just completely bankrupt in all areas of her life, and just so tired, not only like physically, but just from being in survival mode for so long. And it was that woman, that broken woman who thought she was failing every day, that had the courage to just, even if she didn't know if it was going to work or not, take that one step, and take that blood pressure pill and believe that something's got to be different. Something's got to be different. And it was that woman that saved my life. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I learned that even in my darkest times, like I can do stuff if I just do something. If I just do something, if I just choose the right uncomfortable. I had two choices. I could choose the uncomfortable that I was in and nothing would change and it probably would get worse and I might have died. Or I could
Mhm.
choose the uncomfortable of finally doing some self-care. And I chose the uncomfortable that might get me a little bit closer to hope. And I'm glad that I did, because it completely changed my life. I literally had no clue that my life was going to be what it is today and how beautiful it could be. I never could have dreamed my life could be this amazing and this beautiful. And it was because of that woman who was told she had 6 months to live, taking that one tiny step.
And so looking back now, what would you tell that version of yourself? What would you
Thank,
tell her?
thank you.
That's
Thank you.
lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. I would tell her she saved my life.
And I'm glad you listened to her.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Let's talk a little bit about the programs and services that you offer to the collective.
All right. So I obviously do a lot of speaking, right? Do a lot of appearances on podcasts, a lot of appearances on stages. I also do a lot of consulting for businesses, right? I'll help businesses with reaching out to family caregivers, with planning caregiver events, with helping them with their strategy to connect with caregivers, how to market to family caregivers. Really, the whole goal in that is to be able to, there's a lot of really powerful businesses out there, right? And they could be reaching even more family caregivers, right? And that's what I want to help them do, because the family caregivers, the stats for family caregivers are 30% of family caregivers pass before the person they're caring for, 35% of them pass within 5 years of the person they're caring for passing. And if they're over 70, 65% of them pass before the person they're caring for. So I'm on a different clock and I'm motivated by a different thing. The more people we can help collectively, like the more lives we can save, right? So, and I also do some individual coaching with family caregivers. That's not the main part of my business. I limit it to 10, but I do have some other groups that I have that people are able to be a part of. I also teach a master class once a month, family caregiver master class, which for anybody who's listening, if they would like to have free admission to that master class, more than happy to let them do that. But mainly, and I do a lot of advocacy work too. I do a lot of advocacy work, with state and federal policy changes and just any kind of advocacy that will make positive changes for not only caregivers, but the community in general and the family members that they're caring for.
And so how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you or work with you?
So my website is ChristinaKeys.com. And you can email me at Christina@ChristinaKeys.com. I've also got a national community text line because I'm a community builder. That's what I do, community engager, community builder. My text line is 360-230-7736.
I'll definitely put all of that in the show notes. And so we have a couple minutes left. I have a signature closing question here that I ask all my guests. And so
Okay.
this is the question for you. What is your closing message for humanity to help in our collective healing and empowerment?
Be kind to yourself. We're kind to others. We're kind to others and we're loving to others. I would say, remember to put yourself on that list and remember the things that you've done, to save your life, the things that you've done for others to help them. You matter and your voice matters.
I like that. Thank you so much. So thank you, Christina, for being here today and for sharing all this wonderful information and resources that I think will be so helpful for so many people that are in need right now. For everybody who's watching and listening, thank you for your time. And until next time, bye for now.